So here was the plan. This is how this was going to go, all right? So Wednesday morning, we were going to talk about the signing class on signing day. You know, the Morning Pitt on Wednesday was going to be about the signing class on signing day. That's normal. That's expected. And then yesterday's Morning Pitt, the Thursday Morning Pitt, was going to be about signing day recap and some of the surprises and the latest from the transfer portal and that kind of thing. And we weren't going to do a mailbag episode this week because we would spend the Friday edition of the Morning Pitt talking about the basketball game on Wednesday night, Pitt playing at Mississippi State. We weren't going to, it was going to be too late when that game ended, 9:15 tip-off. It was going to end too late for us to record a Morning Pitt after that game. And so that's okay. Yesterday we had plenty to talk about with the signing class and the transfers and things like that. And then we could segue right into some basketball talk here to close out the week. Nice fun Friday afternoon or Friday morning conversation about Pitt hoops as they continue rolling at 8-1. And yeah. Now I think we'll probably do we'll do a mailbag today. I had to put out a late call for questions about Pitt sports and Pitt things. Put it out on social media, on Twitter and Blue Sky to take questions because let's be honest, nobody wants to talk about that basketball game from Wednesday night. I mean, nobody. That was an absolute and abject disaster. I mean, that was a hot mess. And it was really, you know what it reminded me of? It reminded me of the 2018 ACC championship game against Clemson, where, like, if you recall, literally the first play from scrimmage, the first play after a touchback, Pitt kicks off, touchback, Clemson gets the ball at their own 25, and the first play, Travis Etienne goes 75 yards for a touchdown. And somehow it got worse from there. Like it was never, you know what it was? It was Vin Diesel in the Fast and the Furious saying, "You never had me. You never had your car." Like Dabo Swinney said to Pat Narduzzi, "You never had me." And on Wednesday night, Mississippi State said to Pitt basketball, "You never had me. You never had your car." It was not even close. It was a destruction of epic proportions. Our guy Jim Hammett called it a bludgeoning, and that's what it was. What was the final? 90-57. It might as well have been 190-57. It was not close at all. And yeah, Pitt scored a little more in the second half than they scored in the first half, and the deficit in scoring in the second half was a little bit better than it was in the first half. But you know what? It was only that. It was only those scores because Mississippi State decided it would be so. They were so in control of the game. You might as well put a couple other guys at the scorer's table running the scoreboard because that's how much influence they had over determining what points went up on the board. If Mississippi State wanted it to be a 38-point win, they would have made it a 38-point win. If they wanted it to be a 27-point win, they would have made it a 27-point win. It's rare in sports these days to see one team just absolutely control a game against a, largely equal opponent. Not talking about playing down divisions or something like that. Georgia playing an FCS team or something like that. Like, we're talking about two power conference teams of, both with good records who have looked good this season. To see one team just completely decimate the other, you don't get that very often. And I know a frequent reference has been made to Pitt's game at Wake Forest last year, where the Demon Deacons won by 33 and just dominated. That game was actually one where Pitt was worse in the second half than they were in the first half. And they were bad in the first half, but they were actually worse in the second half. Usually, when you get these games that are blowouts, I feel like more often than not, you get just a complete destruction in the first half, and then the losing team sort of battles back a little bit. They get some of the backups in, and they're playing against backups maybe, and they make it a little bit more of a game than it was in the first half. Like, also Wednesday night, Ohio State was playing Maryland. Ohio State, who couldn't miss against Pitt. Ohio State goes down 50-17 at halftime. They ended up outscoring Maryland in the second half, still lost by a ton. It didn't matter. And I feel like you often see that. Last year in the game at Wake Forest, that wasn't the case. Like, yeah, here, this Mississippi State game on Wednesday night, Pitt scored more in the second half than they did in the first and all that. Last year at Wake Forest, they actually were worse in the second half than they were in the first half. But it ultimately didn't matter. If Mississippi State wanted Pitt to only score 30 points or wanted Pitt to score 39 points, they controlled everything. Every element was in the Bulldogs' control, and there was nothing Pitt could do about it. Start to finish, there was nothing Pitt could do about it. The Panthers made back-to-back field goals once in the entire game. There was only one time Pitt made back-to-back field goals with no Mississippi State points in between. And that was like 5 or 6 minutes into the game. 4 or 5 minutes into the game, I should say. Jalen Lowe made a pair of jump shots. And actually then Zach Austin made 2 free throws, so it was a 6-0 run. And you know what Mississippi State did when Pitt went on a 6-0 run? They made 4 baskets in a row. And Zach Austin had the audacity to break that up with a 3-pointer. And you know what Mississippi State did after that? They made 6 more baskets in a row for like a, what 22-3 run? Like, it was that kind of game where, like, Pitt didn't even need to get any momentum. Pitt needed to just start saying the word, and then boom, Mississippi State would just shut them down. I mean, it was that dominant, and this is not hyperbole. I mean, there was nothing Pitt could do. They got out-rebounded. They got outscored on second chance points. They got outscored off points off turnovers. Every points in the paint. I think Mississippi State had 52 points in the paint. There may be no stat that is a greater indication of dominance than something outrageous like that in the paint. 52 points in the paint. And I mean, Pitt had, I feel like Pitt did very little. I mean, we know Pitt did very little in the paint because they did very little overall. 14 points in the paint. So Mississippi State scored 52 points in the paint. Pitt had 14. And that like, points in the paint are just about who is physically stronger. You know, who is going to rise to the occasion and be more physical down low. And not every single one of those points in the paint came from, you know, centers grabbing rebounds or centers, you know, posting up or something like that. Some of it is guards driving and just driving right to the hoop, meeting very little resistance along the way. Mississippi State was stronger, they looked faster, and they looked more intentional. Everything they did was purposeful and successful. And Pitt spent the entire game reacting on both ends of the court. Mississippi State dictated both ends of the court. When they were on offense, Pitt couldn't keep up. And when Mississippi State was on defense, there was nothing Pitt could do. They tried to drive, they tried to pass, they tried to shoot. Mississippi State rejected all of it. It was the kind of game that I didn't know if this team would run into this season. I knew they'd lose games. I picked them to lose 6. But I also thought they'd only lose 1 game in the non-conference, so I'm going to have to adjust my preseason predictions. I knew they'd lose games, but I didn't know if they would have a game like this. Well, they did. And it almost was so bad and so ridiculous that I'm not even sure if you can sit back and say, okay, what does this tell us about this Pitt team going forward? I'm not sure it tells us anything about this Pitt team going forward. Do they need to be stronger in the post and under the basket? Yeah. Do they need to be able to get going with their guards? Yeah. They got very little of the things that they've been getting so much of this season from the guards, particularly Jalen Lowe and Ishmael Leggett driving to the basket. Leggett didn't have a good game. Leggett had a really ineffective game on Wednesday night. But he had 8 really effective games coming into it. And so I'm inclined to think Ishmael Leggett's still really good. Jalen Lowe played well, one of the bright spots. There were probably 2 bright spots in that game on Wednesday night. Jalen Lowe was one. Brandon Cummings was the other. Cummings scored 12 points. He was one of the few guys. I mean, like, I'm not going to sit here and say Pitt looked intimidated. I don't think they looked intimidated. I think they looked stifled. I think they looked frustrated. I think they looked ineffective, but I don't necessarily think they looked intimidated. But Brandon Cummings, for being a freshman, certainly undersized against some of the strength and, you know, power that the Mississippi State guys had, playing on the road in an environment that was much tougher than I expected it to be, much tougher than I thought it was going to be going in. He looked like he belonged. Brandon Cummings did. And so I think that's a positive step, you know. And again, you try and find whatever positives you can in a game like that, because there weren't a whole lot of them. But onward and upward, right? Pitt's got Virginia Tech tomorrow, another road game. The Panthers' long road trip will finally come to an end when they play this game at Virginia Tech, that random orphan ACC game in the middle of December before they jump back into the final 2 non-conference games, and then the full ACC schedule when the real season begins. If they can come out of this stretch of the schedule at, what are they now, 7-2? If they could be 10-2 coming out of this stretch of the schedule, that would be really good. Obviously, the Virginia Tech game stands as a major bounce-back opportunity. I think Pitt fans are hoping that the team is angry enough about Wednesday night's results that they'll go take their frustrations out on the Hokies. We'll see if they're able to do it. I think they're able to do it. We'll see if they pull it off. We'll see if they accomplish it. But in the meantime, we are going to do a mailbag. And here we got another long intro, 10 minutes in of talking about basketball. But I took some questions on Twitter and Blue Sky. Let's do it. Let's talk a little Pitt football, Pitt basketball, Pitt recruiting, Pitt volleyball here in the mailbag edition of the Morning Pitt on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Yeah, it's a Friday edition of the Morning Pitt. You know, we always do the mailbag, and I just thought with signing day and the way this week was going, I didn't think we'd do a mailbag this week. I thought we had plenty to talk about, but then I didn't want to spend 20 minutes talking about Pitt basketball. I just spent 10 minutes talking about Pitt basketball, but I think I said everything I want to say there. I don't have anything more to say. I would just be rambling and trying to make things up over the next 10 minutes. There's no point in that. So let's get into some questions here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. As we always ask you to do, make sure you like this video and subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. And then it's the weekend and Christmas is just around the corner. It's like 19 days away from now. That's ridiculous. There's a whole lot I need to get done. Probably you as well. I'm sure you have a lot of shopping to do. Go over to homefieldapparel.com and buy the best Pitt gifts you can find for the Pitt fan in your life. And remember, use the promo code PIT24. You can get 15% off your first order at homefieldapparel.com. Their Pitt stuff is awesome. You're going to want to buy some for the Pitt fan in your life and buy some for yourself because they just look that great. Go check it out, homefieldapparel.com. Use the promo code PIT24. All right, first question comes on Blue Sky. We try and use that social media page as well, Twitter and Blue Sky. That's where we took questions this week for the mailbag just to mix things up. Sean's Rambling says, how about volleyball? How far do you think the team will go? And yeah, your number one Pitt Panthers, the number one team in the country, the number one overall seed in the NCAA tournament, will open first round play tonight at the Peterson Event Center, 7 o'clock against Morehead State. If they win that, they will face either Oklahoma or UTEP on Saturday. Also at the Peterson Event Center, very cool that they're playing there, and I believe they'll host. If they keep winning, they'll keep hosting at the Peterson Event Center all the way through until they make to the Final Four. And if they get to the Final Four, they will go to Louisville, which is fun. They could end up facing Louisville in the Final Four, either in the semifinals or in the finals. And to your question, how far do I think they will go? Wait, let me just see the exact wording, because the answer is the same regardless. How far do I think the team will go? I wasn't sure if you were asking how far do I think the team should go. Either way, the answer is all the way. This team should win a national championship. I think we often, in this town in particular, and probably a lot of sports towns, certainly sports towns that have had the kind of overall multi-sport success that Pittsburgh has had, we are very championship-centric. I think more than a lot of towns, and I think more than a lot of like college towns. Although I think as the college football playoffs becomes more entrenched, you'll see more championship. College basketball is still a sport where you hang a banner for making the national semifinals. Not necessarily for winning the championship. And you actually don't hang a banner for making the national title game. You hang a banner for making the Final Four. Or you hang a banner for winning the national championship. I think these sports have always been the type, Big Ten and Pac-12 teams or Big Ten and Pac-10 teams used to hang banners for winning the Rose Bowl. Or you win one of the big bowl games. These sports weren't always just championship or bust. But I think in some towns they are. And I think Pittsburgh is certainly one of those. I think this really first kind of hit me in the mid-2000s, or the early 2000s, I should say, when Jamie Dixon consistently making the Sweet 16 was considered a failure. He can only get to the Sweet 16. I think in a lot of college basketball towns, not all, and I think there are certainly exceptions, but I think in a lot of college basketball towns, consistently making the Sweet 16 would be viewed as pretty good success. But around here, it was viewed as failure and coming up short, and he's just not good enough. It's the same mentality, when Bill Cowher would lose in the AFC championship game. You can never win the big one. You can never get over the hump. He's making it to the conference championship game. Literally, like the AFC championship game is literally the Final Four. And it was never good enough. If a college basketball team made the Final Four as often as Bill Cowher made the AFC championship game, that team would name the court after him. If you can make that many, Final Fours. And so all of this is to say that I think maybe in the city of Pittsburgh, we have pretty significant championship or bust mentality. And I don't think that always applies to college sports. I think college sports, there's this in-between ground of success, but not necessarily a championship. And I say all of this as a preface to say, for this Pitt volleyball team, it's championship or bust. They need to go all the way. They need to reach the Final Four, the national championship game, and they need to win it all. And I'm not going to say they're failures or fell short. I would say they fell short if they don't win the national championship. I won't say that they weren't the best team in the country. I won't say that they failed or they weren't a success. I mean, like, they're a great team with great players, great people. As you've talked to different ones, it's everything. You like everything about that program. But this year, with this team, the players they brought back, the returning seniors, and I mean, like, damn, if you have Olivia Babcock, you need to win a national championship. Not to mention Tori Stafford and Bree Kelly and Rachel Fairbanks and so on and so forth down the list of outstanding players, some of the best players in the country on this team. You need to win a national championship, and I think they will. Like, I mean, my predictions are terrible. I shouldn't even say it because I get it wrong every damn time. But I think they will because they are just that special. They are the best team in the country. And the last thing I'll say, and we've gone a long time talking about volleyball here. The last thing I'll say about it is what I've said a number of times throughout this season. When we've gotten into a volleyball conversation, that this team just has a killer instinct. And you've seen it when they've played against lesser teams. And I even asked Olivia Babcock about this when we had a conversation with her here on the Morning Pitt a few weeks ago. I said, it almost seems like you guys kind of like toy with teams. You probably don't intentionally do it, but you just kind of toy with teams. They get a little bit close. They maybe make it competitive. And then all of a sudden you're just like, oh, wait, no, you don't play with us. You're not on our level. And then they just crush them. And like no regard, no mercy. And there was a great article that came out on ESPN yesterday about the Pitt volleyball team, and it's outstanding. And it talks about the hunter mentality that they have, and it just lines up exactly with that. This team has a hunter's mentality. They have a killer instinct to just crush teams, and it's evidenced by their record. They've only lost once. And they've, lost very few sets overall. And so this team should go all the way. That's the expectation for them. I think they would feel like they failed and fell short of their goals if they don't get there and win it all. And so how far do I think they'll go? I think they'll go all the way. And I think they'll bring Pitt a national championship. Let's see. There was another question here on Blue Sky. Tank Stark says, it looks like there's an open slot in the 2025 football schedule. Any thoughts on how that'll be filled? Yeah, it'll be an FCS team. Possibility of Robert Morris, seems like. But it'll be an FCS team that they'll fill out the schedule. And then I got to think that game should be scheduled by now. I can't imagine they still have it open. That should be on the books, but nothing's been announced, at least not on Pitt's end. All right, on Twitter, we had some questions that came in. Some good stuff here. Let's see. Marlon Barnes, junior season, says, what starter do you think on Pitt's football roster is at the most risk of transferring? That's tough to say. I mean, I think a lot of starters are going to be targeted. You know what I mean? I think the linebackers, Kyle Lewis and Rasheem Biles, are going to be targeted by other schools. I think Kenny Johnson's going to be targeted by other schools. I think Ryan Baer is going to be targeted by other schools. I think Eli Holstein's going to be targeted by other schools. I think there are going to be a number of guys who are targeted. I think Pitt's going to retain most of them, if not all. They'll probably lose somebody who's a starter. I don't know, but they'll probably lose somebody who's a starter just because eventually there's going to be a school that puts the right dollar figure in front of the guy and he says, all right, I'll do it. But I don't know who that'll be. It'll depend on, that guy's perspective on Pitt and how much money's getting put in front of him. C Coffee says, what's Pitt's ceiling next year and who will be QB1? I think the ceiling's 10-2. I think that's probably everything goes right, they play really well, they have a lot of success, yeah, I think they can be a 10-win team. And the QB1 is going to be Eli Holstein. I think there's enough evidence of Eli Holstein being really good that, I think there should be a fair amount of confidence in him being able to succeed. He's got to stay healthy. Just real briefly, he had some real shining moments in the first 5 games. He wasn't perfect in the first 5 games, but he had some real shining moments and obviously made some huge plays to come back and win against Cincinnati and West Virginia. Played probably his most complete game at North Carolina. And then he ran into some different kinds of defenses. Cal played a different defensive approach against Pitt than the previous 5 teams had done. And Syracuse kind of mimicked it. And Syracuse was a weird game anyway because they got 3 defensive touchdowns. SMU was a weird game because they were kind of out of it right from the start. I mean, that was another game where it just sort of felt like it was out of reach from the get-go. And then he started getting hurt. And he started getting hurt in the Syracuse game. And so, I think the last 5 games, and if you want to extend it back to the Syracuse and Cal games, the last 7 games, I think have affected the way people view Eli Holstein and what he was able to accomplish and what he was able to do and how he was able to play. I think he's still going to be really good. And I think he's going to be Pitt's starting quarterback next year, and I think he's going to have a good season. I really do. I don't know if they'll reach that ceiling of 10-2, but I think that's probably where their ceiling is, provided they bring back the key guys and provided they're able to add some essential pieces from the transfer portal. And to that end, Chris Bruno asks us a question, says, you probably get this a lot, but how many offensive linemen do you think Pitt will try to land in the portal? Do you believe Ryan Baer and Isaiah Montgomery as tackles are improving enough to be the next 2 seasons? Do you believe Baer Montgomery tackles improving enough to be the next 2 seasons? I mean, you're asking, do I think those guys can be the starters over the next 2 years? For 2025, I think you're going to see big numbers coming in on the offensive line from the transfer portal. Big numbers. Multiple starters, multiple depth guys. So I think the intention is to use the transfer portal in order to avoid being in this situation again, where one injury, and it really ultimately, Lyndon Cooper missed a game, Ryan Jacoby, Jason Collier in and out, and that kind of shifted things around. But it was ultimately Branson Taylor's injury that created such upheaval on the offensive line that it really kind of sank the season. I think they want to be in a position where one injury doesn't do that again. So you bring in two starters, maybe 2 starting tackles, and you shift Ryan Baer back inside to left guard. Feel okay about BJ Williams, feel okay about Lyndon Cooper, bring in 2 starting tackles, and you have 2 transfers starting on the edge, plus Williams and Baer at guard and Cooper at center. That's a possibility, right? And then bring in some depth guys, some guys who have some experience, or at least, even if they don't have a lot of experience, they've been in a college football program for a few years. They're building their strength. They're getting, they know what it takes to play at that level. And then maybe you've built up your depth a little bit with some veterans. So I think it's huge. I think it's going to be a big group, 4 or 5 transfers, maybe more. I think they are going to go heavy on offensive line, which makes sense because it is the biggest need on this team. And it's, probably the area that needs to be addressed the most through the portal. And it's, an area where I think they're going to invest a lot of resources in trying to bring guys in. And I think it makes sense to go heavy on the O-line and put a lot of resources into it because you, if you are optimistic about Eli Holstein as the quarterback of the future, you've got at least 1 year left with him. Maybe more, I don't know. But you've got at least 1. You know that for sure. And so you want to make sure you give him every chance to succeed and play at the level he's capable of playing. It's going to be hard for him to do that if he's under pressure constantly like he was this year. And so I think that's why it's so important. Sell out, go heavy on the offensive line, bring in a ton of those guys, and see if you can really get this offense clicking at a high level all season long, not just for a few games in the first half of the season. So big time priority, going to bring in big numbers, and then, what becomes of Baer Montgomery down the road, I don't know. But for 2025, they need a better starting 5 than they put out there. Because even this year, even when Branson Taylor was still out there, It's not like the O-line was great. They had issues even back then. So it's got to be better this year so they can try to capitalize and maximize what they've got and the opportunity they have in 2025. So, all right, good questions there. I appreciate everybody who submitted questions. We might do that every now and then, take questions from social media. We usually take the questions from the message boards at Panther-Lair.com, so make sure you check that out at Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com to get all the Pitt sports news you can possibly handle. Go check it out there. We take questions on the message boards, but we also, like I say, every now and then we'll take some mailbag questions on social media, Twitter and Blue Sky. That's always fun to do. So thanks for tuning in today. I appreciate it. Hope you've had a good week. Pitt's got a big basketball game tomorrow at Virginia Tech. We'll all be keeping an eye on that one, so make sure you tune in. And, I think that about covers it. But thanks for watching today. Thanks for watching all week long. We appreciate it. Make sure you like and subscribe, and we will catch up with you on Monday for the Morning Pit right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.